Great, welcome everybody. In person in the Jordan Center, on Zoom. It's my great pleasure to introduce Alexander Sasha Kondakov, who's an assistant professor at the School of Sociology at the University College London, Dublin, oh my God, Ireland. He has had posts all over the world, though I think not in London.
Not yet. No.
Yeah, not yet. University of Helsinki's major research center in Russian and Eurasian studies, the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He studied sociology of law at the International Institute for Sociology of Law in Spain, and he pioneered a course on queer theory in the European University at St. Petersburg in Russia, which I assume is not being taught right now.
No, I don't think so.
No.
You never know.
Oh yeah, but that is law. His latest research on violence against LGBT people in Russia has gotten attention in the international Russian media, and studies have been published in journals including Sexuality, Social and Legal Studies, Feminist Legal Studies, and European Journal of Criminology. And I have to say, I can't remember which article it was that when it came out, I was so happy because I had a colleague who used to try to not quite justify things Putin's Russia was doing, but try to soften how they seemed. And we were talking about the gay propaganda law, and he said, well, it's about expression. It's not as if it's leading to more violence against LGBT people. I said, well, I happen to have this article right here. It was a perfect moment. That's on my phone. I just got it. And I guess I won that argument, but I never really got a response to it. But anyway, in that particular case, it was so wonderful to have someone confirm what on the one hand is patently obvious, but on the other hand really needs to be backed up with data and with information to make the case. So his new book, Violent Affection, that's just started reading recently. It's really fantastic. I've skimmed it, and now I've finished the introduction, and I can't wait to hear what Sasha has to say today. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this generous introduction, and I'm definitely happy to be here presenting this book that is at the same time has been published already and also is about to be published. So its hard version is available in Europe, but not in the United States just yet. But I'll get to it in a moment. So indeed, yes, I'm a researcher currently from Ireland in Dublin. Or from Dublin in Ireland, but I actually am from Russia, and it's a strange moment to be from that place, definitely. There's a lot of violence associated with Russia. It's just one facet of it that I'm going to talk about today. I always have the trigger warning when I present from the book, because the book is about violence, and it's about very brutal forms of violence. So it's about murders, injuries, killings of people. I will not talk a lot about it this particular time, but just in case, I want to have that warning there. It's about criminal forms of violence, and it's based on criminal court rulings. So those are documents that depict violence in very specific, but also very open and exposed forms. So that warning is there. The presentation that I'm offering at the moment indeed refers to this book that has been published. It was published in September in Europe, and it's actually available in online open access form, so everybody can access worldwide. It's a PDF version. But as for hard copies, and I actually brought one, so I will distribute it to the audience at the center, just for you to take a look. The hard copies will be available in the United States only in February next year through University of Chicago Press. But you can, as I said, access PDF, electronic version of it, and Kindle version for, I don't know, $1 or something on Amazon. And the book is a contribution into something I call, I'd like to call, queer criminology. So it's about criminology. It's a branch of criminology, let's say, sociological studies of crime. But it's about LGBT plus people, so it's about sexuality and in different ways. But it's also a kind of theoretically heavy endeavor, right? And my contribution to this particular field of studies relates to, on the one hand, uncovering, and on the other hand, maybe also somewhat constructing a hypothesis about a new form of power that my claim exists in the world today, neo-disciplinary power, right? So that's the major argument of the book. Meanwhile, it's actually based on a lot of research and a lot of materials. It's based on a database of violence that I collected together with other scholars in Russia. We had a little group of queer researchers back in the days. We collected something like 3,000 cases of court decisions from all over Russia that address somehow, in a way, in different ways, sexuality of victims, of perpetrators, of different kinds. And out of those 3,000 cases, I selected only 300, a little bit over 300 cases that concern unique attacks on victims because of their sexuality, right? So these are 314 queer victims, or cases involving 314 queer victims that I analyzed in this research for the book and for a broader kind of study in general. And the idea behind this research was very simple, and with eventually a very simple kind of argument or outcome, exactly the one that Elliot just mentioned, right? So in 2013, in Russia, a federal law banning something called gay propaganda or propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships was adopted. And my idea was just to check whether or not that law, discussions around that law contributed into anti-LGBT plus violence in the country, right? So I collected all those cases and eventually counted them. And it turned out that in 2013, the number of victims started to grow. And moreover, by 2015, the number of victims grew twofold, right? So twice as many victims were in 2015 than in 2012, for example. That was the kind of simple argument that was offered in that article. Partly it's still in the book, but people, when I presented, for example, this argument and the reviewer number 2 as well, they asked, but why? What is the exact link between the rise of numbers, between the growth of violence and this gay propaganda law? It's probably not, or not necessarily, those two things are not necessarily connected, people argued, right? So this particular presentation, you can say, is methodological. It kind of lays down my answer to this question, and it's the answer to the question how exactly the rise of violence, the growth of violence against LGBTQ persons is connected to the law, right? And how more generally different kinds of utterances, different kinds of words are connected to actions, right? Words of the state especially are connected to the actions of perpetrators. And that link, you might say, is not necessarily direct, but I think what I'm showing in the book that we can actually draw quite a very straight line between those two processes, between those two things. But that line is theoretical, methodological, and everything like that. So it's about law, it's about power, it's about how power makes things circulate around, and how eventually those things resonate in forms, for example, of violence. What I found in those cases that I reviewed were many different kinds of emotions that people express, that they use, right? The perpetrators especially, to explain their violence, to kind of justify what they did, right? And or those were not necessarily perpetrators, because the cases that I analyzed, they're actually written by legal actors, by judges, by clerks, by prosecutors, by police officers. So those were documents mediated by law and by those legal actors, and therefore who exactly offered this or that explanation and interpretation wasn't entirely clear, even though the voices of actual perpetrators is definitely there in those documents. Anyway, so among all those explanations, I was looking for some specific manifestations of emotions. I was looking for hate, I was looking for dislikes, disgust, and things like that, and I found them, of course. But also there were more emotions at stake when mentioned when people tried to justify their violence or explain their actions. And so these emotions, the violent affections, I call them eventually, they take definitely different categories, different forms, and they have different purposes, right? They are for the speaker, they're good as a strategy to defend themselves, to kind of explain their actions, maybe try to escape the punishment. I know they have all those different ideas in their hands, or in their heads. For the legal actors, those emotions play a different role. They want to build a narrative of a case, and they want to show, if those are prosecutors, for example, or judges, they want to show how that narrative leads to a specific conclusion, the conclusion of guilt usually. Well, all those cases that I analyzed are cases where the defendant were found guilty, right? So the narrative is that. But regardless of all those different purposes or goals of mentioning these emotions that are definitely there, they all have one thing in common. Eventually, they all kind of result in deaths and injuries and violence more generally, right? I will give you just a couple of examples. Probably, I won't even kind of read those cases to you, but just for you to grasp what the analysis was exactly. So how it worked, right? This is an expert from an actual case, and people describe what happened there, and definitely. Even from this translation, which is not perfect, to be sure, you can grasp kind of legalistic or very specific kind of language that I tried to convey even when translating those cases. I tried to kind of replicate somehow how legal actors talk, how they compose their cases. But in any case, so here somehow, yeah, and I chose unusual emotions for an example here. somehow the very possibility of sexual intercourse, same-sex sexual intercourse, results in the perpetrator being shocked, being even humiliated, right? And hurt by this very fact, interestingly enough. For the victim, it eventually results in injuries and murder. Or this is probably less unusual. Yes, it's the emotion of anger that was kind of triggered by sexual advances on the one hand, but was also fueled for quite a time through, kind of internal thinking process of this perpetrator who already went to sleep alone, and yet still kept thinking about this episode that she had with eventually people who will become eventually victims, and decided to kill them, right, while they were sleeping as well. So these are the kinds of emotions that I analyzed, and here I want to say that as narratives of different criminal rulings, of different criminal cases, they present emotions as individual things, as things that people as individual persons experience and then try to explain to the larger world, right? But I'm interested in emotions on the social, societal level. So I'm a sociologist actually, and I know very little about that individual level of emotional state. Rather, I'm interested in this kind of social, emotional intercourse or circulation of emotions that is going on and manifests itself in those cases, right, in those rulings. There's a lot of literature about that, definitely in cultural studies, in sociology, in theoretical, philosophical ideas about that. And in this literature, this circulation is actually connected to power and to power relations more generally, right? This process of circulation of emotions is actually very well studied, and usually, even though those books, those contributions, academic contributions, are kind of post-structuralist, very cutting-edge ideas, still, I feel that many of them present this process of circulation of emotions in society in a very structural way, in the way that you can see how things work easily. If I can say so, they try to present it a little bit more simplistically than or simple than it actually is. Usually there's a specific emotion, like let's say shame or hate or disgust, and if it's described by anyone in such a form, with the use of this category, it can be easily identifiable, and the analysis eventually kind of tells you precisely what that emotion involves, how it works, how it can be eventually exchanged for different other values. For example, for political legitimacy, right? If a politician expresses or disseminates a lot of hate, that politician is interested in accumulating some sort of legitimacy from that dissemination, and usually it works. And those pieces of literature, they tell you how exactly that process occurs. This process is very clear and very centralized in this theoretical literature, and I think that it is so due to the fact that it's usually built on Foucauldian understanding of power, that even though he claimed a lot that power is dispersed and it's micro power, it's everywhere, even though he thought so, his idea is actually very much kind of structure, has a very, very specific structure too, and that's the structure of the Panopticon, right? The Panopticon is a metaphor that he used to describe that power, and the Panopticon is a metaphor of a kind of guard tower in the center of building, and in that building everybody thinks that they're being looked at, and that's why they behave in certain ways, because they think that the guards are looking at them. But that centralized source of legitimization, of truth, of power is there, and it's at the core of all those theories. And that's, I thought, actually is a problem. One more word about this is that that guard tower, that Panopticon, represented in modern times the expertise, right? This is the real Panopticon. This let's say medical expertise that tells you the ultimate truth about your health, about your body, about everything, and you can believe in it because they're the experts, they know this stuff. But that was my doubt, actually, in all this. First, I had all those different emotions that didn't correspond to clear-cut categories like hate, like shame. I had a lot of them, and they were sometimes very different from bad emotions like camaraderie, fun, this kind of stuff. This is one thing. And the second thing was that they actually circulated in some kind of decentralized manner. They mattered for some people, not for others. So the situation was more fluid, more fragmented, more complex than the metaphor of the Panopticon allows. And that's why I thought, well, maybe we are getting into some kind of new situation here. Maybe that this Panopticon doesn't matter anymore. It was valid for the 20th century, for the second half of it maybe, but now expertise is much more open concept. And if I continue the same example, if you are not feeling well, yeah, probably you go to the doctor, but maybe you just Google symptoms, you know, and maybe you just rely on, and many people rely on, other kinds of expertise nowadays, right? And some people rely on this kind of expertise and others on that kind of expertise. And so the society becomes fragmented, and there are different kinds of truth that are not connected to one centralized power of the Panopticon that are circulating around, right? And that's how this doubt actually resulted into the next step, yeah, looking at a decentralized information flows when, you know, with the idea that nowadays any information can become truth. It doesn't matter anymore if it's enhanced, or it matters if it's enhanced by an expertise, but in some kind of different way, not in the way we got used to. Yeah, the circulation of emotions based on this Panopticon-like structure isn't working anymore. So the memes were actually introduced to me through the work of Eliot. Yes, that I found very, very illuminating, and the idea of memetics there, and I think you used it less seriously in your book, to trace the conspiracy theories and so on and so forth, as a metaphor rather than real methodology. But starting from plots against Russia, I started to investigate memetics more, and I found that a lot of people are much more serious about it, and especially in socio-legal and legal studies more generally. Here are some examples, and it's been there. This method has been there for a while, but it's the problem of it was always that, where I found that it was too kind of positivist and too again specific or concrete. They would find one phrase, one legal kind of concept, and they would trace it as if it never changes from the Roman law to today's kind of interpretations, as if it's just the very same thing that travels through millennia, through centuries, and doesn't change at all. Then they would trace the whereabouts of that meme, of that concept, only in legal documents, like in statutes, in court decisions, in very specific corpus of texts. Whereas those concepts, not only they exist, those memes, not only they exist in different forms, they might also travel across different fields and kind of emerge in law, but then they can be used in other contexts, in other fields. I'll talk a little bit about it soon enough. But so there was that, and also there was like the idea that not only they circulate simply those memes, right? The legal concepts, not only they circulate for some kind of unknown to us reason, but they actually circulate in order to make the law evolve into some kind of better form. So they actually, the memes, they have, the legal memes at least, they have this mission of evolution. They kind of, with each iteration, they make the law better. They somehow enhance this institution. And that was also the third doubt that I have about that methodology. And that's how I started to create my kind of own ideas about memetics. I call it discursive memetics, something less positivist, more open to various possibilities. And I have just 5 principles of these this method of this discursive memetics. It's something actually beyond the book, something that's being developed kind of further in my current work. So yeah, memes are interesting pieces of information. They're concepts, they're ideas. One of the things that I learned reading all those materials, Eliot's book, and all those other studies, is that they have their own agenda. They have their own purpose of existence. And I want to conceptualize it in terms of distributed agency. Like Jane Bennett's, for example, work is a good instance of that argument. So they are contributors of a part of kind of common action that we do together with other things, humans, non-humans, memes, and so on and so forth, right? So any action that we take is actually not of our own, but is distributed between many different agents, memes included. Then they are not represented by any specific phrase or a word or a number of words. They're actually, as concepts, they can come in different forms. Like the emotions I showed you, for example, probably maybe we can say that they refer to one and the same thing, this violent affection, right? But that affection comes in a form of hate, in a form of camaraderie, or in the form of fun, in the form of shame, and so on and so forth. So they come in different forms. They are, you can say, being reified in various ways at the moment, right? Or in the moment of their invocation. They are conservative, their records, right? Their records of some kind of information, some kind of concept that was created, emerged in the past, but that has performative outcomes at the moment of its use, right? So there is that thing as well. They are not simply circulating all around, but they have some kind of effects on society, and those effects are definitely effects of power. They are not specific to any particular field, to any particular vocabulary, actually. They can travel across those different vocabularies, but the very fact that they pertain to a field, right? The very fact that it can create a specific meme or concept or idea belongs to a field may influence its character and nature. For example, if we're talking about law and it's a legal term, it definitely can be used outside of law. But the fact that it's a legal term will work somehow outside of law differently if we compare it to the situation that the term isn't legal, right? And I think there are two ideas here. That first, any concept can be enhanced by the power or authority, let's say, of law, and at the same time it can be limited by that field, right? It can become a term, and therefore it can be used only within that specific meaning, narrowing down its range of interpretation. And that's the controversial kind of nature of this thing. And final kind of argument here is that actually memes, these concepts, the way they circulate, they manifest power relations in their circulation. They are a technique of power. And I want to illustrate this with my analysis of the gay propaganda as a meme, right? That's something from the book, actually. So gay propaganda as a meme consists of three different elements. First of all, it's the, well, actually, the form that it comes in Russian law today is the propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships, but it is known in other forms. Gay propaganda is one thing, right? And it's known as such maybe since the 1980s, Section 28 in Britain. Or it's known as LGBT free zones in Poland. Or it's known as ban of deviancy in Hungary. So, you know, it comes in different forms, right? But it definitely has, in this particular form, it has these various elements, the sexual relationships being non-traditional, adjective, and propaganda. Sexual relationships is a way to put, is a way to say, right, queer, gay sex in this kind of euphemistic way, right? When it's a way to say that we don't want to talk about such things publicly, but we found a form to name them without offending the public opinion. We say, oh, this is sexual relationships, non-traditional sexual relationships. It's thought of as something neutral. It's thought of as something stable, relatively stable. So it's not about a one-time, one-night, you know, encounter. It's something about almost orientation, right? But said in a different way. And non-traditional is, of course, it's a very, very rich adjective, and it's a political attempt of erasure. Actually, no, it's a it's a way to say, well, this is something new. This is something that's never been there before. We had this kind of innocent Russia, and then look what happened. This new element was brought somewhere, implying probably from the outside. No, so it works with time. We didn't have it. We haven't had it before, and it works with space. It was brought to us, right, by someone. And I think the propaganda bit explains the kind of rationale behind bringing it to Russia. Propaganda as a method of war, basically, and currently the propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships is actually invoked in Russian government's speeches all the time to justify the new kind of escalation, invasion of Ukraine, right? They're always saying, oh, but otherwise, or they're saying it not once, right? Several times already that idea was put out there. If we don't intervene, right, the innocence of Ukrainian soil will also be lost. And they will have to organize LGBT pride parades there. This is what the patriarch mentioned and Putin alleged to recently. So propaganda is definitely thought of as a sort of war method or rhetorical method, and it's with the aim of kind of political recruitment. This propaganda is being done. It emerged in Russia. This meme started to construct itself somewhere in the 1980s. Actually, if you think about it, it wouldn't make a lot of sense in the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was really kind of, how should I put it, hostile to traditions. So naming something that it didn't like non-traditional wouldn't make a lot of sense there, right? But by the end of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, those ideas started to move around, that actually traditions is something good and we need to come back to them and renounce everything non-traditional, right? And non-traditional sexual orientation, this kind of form of the meme, emerged somewhere there in the 1980s. Then in the 1990s, it was part of common vocabulary for many Russians to refer to gay sex, basically, and in public and in private. It was a common phrase, non-traditional sexual orientation, non-traditional sex, to use in if you want to talk about homosexuality. One way it was used, well, Dan Healy, for example, notes this in his book published in 2001, when he remembers that people in Russia call LGBT sexuality, gay sex, non-traditional sexual orientation, non-traditional sex. Popular psychology books use this very same phrase used in the 1990s when they wanted to introduce to kids the idea of homosexuality, and they would have a section, a chapter on homosexuality, and they would call it non-traditional sexual relationships or non-traditional sexual orientation. I was exposed to that, and my parents gave me a book like that when I was a small boy. Probably this is where I got the idea to become gay, right? In one of those books. But most importantly, it was used in law. In 1993, Russia decriminalized homosexuality, same-sex intercourse. And so kind of a new situation emerged in legal vocabulary. They still left the word muzhelostvo, buggery, in the criminal code, but only to signify same-sex rape, right? So all other kinds of same-sex intercourse required a new way to put it, a new category. And legal actors started to use this non-traditional sexual relationships, non-traditional sexual orientation in their everyday dealings with LGBT sexualities outside of the rape discourse, right? So they started to use this phrase. Moreover, they actually used it in cases to ban propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships, even before the law on propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships was adopted, right? So the practice of banning this propaganda already existed without the law, and that phrase was used. And finally, propaganda actually comes somewhere in the beginning of 2000s when Duma deputies wanted to recriminalize homosexuality. But that seemed definitely out of the table. The government didn't want that. They wouldn't allow anything like that for a variety of different reasons, but basically definitely with the purpose to stay in international institutions where such move wouldn't look great. So propaganda was a kind of walk around that idea. It didn't work in the beginning of 2000s, but eventually, as we know, the idea would resonate very much. Eventually, the propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships was was mentioned in the Constitutional Court decisions in 2006. First, on same-sex marriage, when the Constitutional Court prohibited it, saying that this is not a traditional way we do things in Russia. And in 2010, Constitutional Court also commented on regional gay propaganda bans, again, using the phrase non-traditional, this time marital relationships, implying that actually sex can be only performed in marriage. So this is not it. So I would say this is quite a huge success of the meme. It it emerged in the 80s and it went to colloquial language, and then it reached the highest court in the country. And moreover, the federal level law was adopted with the usage of this meme, with the usage of this concept. But at the same time, I want to think that probably it somehow was the beginning of its demise too. Even though, as we know, currently there are attempts to revitalize this discourse with a reform of this law, making it more draconian, let's say, if it's not draconian just yet. And this is how I kind of came with this idea of possible demise. So this is the frequency of this meme in media publications about anti-LGBT violence in Russia from 2011 to 2016. This is another set of data that I used in the book and in my research. And it shows that in 2013, actually, the meme is very popular among how do you call them, reporters and media in the media. Yeah, it's very popular, even though they're not reporting on the gay propaganda law. But as the meme becomes a legal concept more and more, this is my explanation, its frequency actually significantly decreases. And in 2016, journalists appear to use it with reluctancy. You know, only if you compare it to 2013, they don't like the term anymore. As for legal actors, they, on the contrary, already used the meme very much. They already liked it. They already, so contrary to the journalists, they that was the common way to refer to LGBT sexualities in law. But after 2013, that usage even grew. They started to, and again, in the cases not related to gay propaganda violence, they started to the gay propaganda law, they started to use it only more frequently. So this, for me, demonstrates that the law, that the meme is becoming a legal term. It's starting to narrow down its interpretation, and therefore, because of that, journalists are trying to use it less because it signifies only one thing, or less things because of being codified. And on the other hand, legal actors, on the contrary, use it more because it's a legal term, right? And so that's, I think, that shows the career of this this meme, this non-traditional sexual relationships concept, both inside the law as a sort of echo chamber, it creates an echo chamber for it, and outside the law as less and less relevant. And final idea, if this is so, it explains why in 2016, violence starts to decrease a little bit, right? So as the meme circulates less and less, it resonates less and less with people, including people who are inclined to react to it with violence against LGBT persons, right? That's just to finish on a good note. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that excellent presentation. We have time for questions both from the studio audience and from Zoom. So
yeah, and if I may, we can discuss anything, not necessarily the whereabouts of gay propaganda meme, I think.
So can you please go back to one of your slides? It's a violent affection slide with like kind of keywords. So first of all, are these keywords that their slide corresponds to how often they are mentioned in your?
No, actually,
okay.
no, just a representation.
Quite large here.
Just a small word. That's fine.
Okay. Then my question is, so if, let's say, person A flirts with person B, and then person B decides to murder person A, irrespective of their gender, we are talking about some pretty extreme reactions here.
Yes.
Right? Because if we think about like outside of the scope of LGBT community, right? People usually don't do that.
I hope so.
For fun.
Yeah.
So we're talking generally about like an extreme subset,
yeah.
right? And so my question is, based on like, I'm not sure you looked into other legal cases, but how often it happens outside of LGBTQ community? Like how often people murder each other, you know, just for fun because somebody was flirting? Like does being gay or lesbian increase the chances of being killed this way or not?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The short answer is yes. Actually, it increases your chances because, of course, it's a special category of crimes and violence. People who are vulnerable in this way, that they have a historically disadvantaged sexuality, they belong to a historically disadvantaged community, can be targeted by perpetrators in this particular way, and they also can, unfortunately, expect violent reactions if there is homophobia or there is a homophobic context, and therefore their advances, for example, their sexuality more generally, the topic of LGBT sexuality can provoke thinking about killing someone. And these are exactly the cases that I'm analyzing. So this is not happening in other interactions between people. If you mention something that does not have a heavy contextual or emotional weight, let's say if you mention something about gummy bears, you are not expecting a violent reaction, right, in that interaction. But at least in Russian context, in these particular situations, so in a small sample, if you mention something related to LGBT sexuality, unfortunately, the cases show you could expect violent reactions of a very brutal kind. So it is specific on the one hand, and moreover, there are violent offenders in my sample, outside of my sample, who specifically target LGBT people because they think they are good victims in terms of they will probably not go to the police, being afraid of exposure of their sexuality to the state, to the police. They can be communicated with on dating websites and applications. So it's easy to target this population, and you can arrange meetings in private apartments with them through. It's common to arrange those meetings, right, through the dating app, and those are many cases that I analyzed. People are contacted on website for the purposes of sex, but actually they are being visited by violent perpetrators. So these are very specific situations. They do not occur in other contexts, in other with other people, right?
Do you think there is a relationship between the economic situation in a country, let's say in Russia, and the level of criminality against the LGBT people?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I do think so, and there are research that show that there is a connection, but not, again, not probably too or very direct one. There's a lot of there are explanations that say that violence in general and violence against historically disadvantaged communities in particular occurs in societies that do not that are not educated in this about these different sexualities, about these issues, about these things, and sometimes that education is also connected to the way those countries, those governments spend their money, and the way wealth in general is distributed among the population. So in poorer countries, in poorer communities, schools are worse, and curricula is different, and sometimes the diversity, sexual and ethnic, is not in the curricula at all. So it's not directly connected to poverty or levels of wealth, but it's connected through education, for example, in the studies. And now Russia is becoming poorer, and it's not that it was a perfect place to educate kids about sexual diversity or any other kind of diversity before, but the chances of this happening are even lower now. So in this way, otherwise, like money and being bad to gays is not connected, actually. Yeah.
So a very simplistic reading of this could be that the state is essentially unleashing people on the LGBT community. And I know you're working on a nuanced statement, but I am wondering if, when looking at the court cases, particularly thinking about like the major media figures who are basically saying that gay people are not human, Do you see a dynamic of a kind of both, we are kind of happy that these people are being attacked versus we are afraid of losing control of the population in the legal space? Right? 'Cause I'm just thinking back to like pogroms in the 19th and early century, where there's not necessarily a huge amount of sympathy for the victims of pogroms, but but the Tsar state is very nervous about losing control of the situation, losing control of the populace. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that at all.
Yeah, thanks for this comment. I actually didn't think about it, but definitely it's in the materials that I analyzed. There was a group of gay bashers organized in around 2012, maybe a little bit before or a little bit after, I can be mistaken. They called themselves Occupy Pedophilia, and so they were supposed to be targeting pedophiles. But they had a very broad definition of pedophilia, and gay male homosexuality was included into that definition. The gay bashing groups were basically finding and targeting gay victims, coming to them, humiliating them on camera, and then publishing this whole process of humiliation online. Some incidents ended up in killings of the people and robberies in their houses. Now, the state wasn't happy about that. And there was definitely some kind of competition between the government and those groups eventually. And the police definitely targeted those groups. They caught many of the leaders of the groups all across the country. And moreover, the major organizer was arrested, trialed, put into prison, and died in very suspicious circumstances, reportedly committed suicide, I think in 2015, so very soon. But definitely the state kind of saw people taking matter in their own hands and tried to stop it with the police power, with policing. Now, that was the only instance I can think about, right? But it's sort of no, exactly what you are describing. So there is definitely that. I need to probably think about it more, but yeah, there's definitely that in the files.
Yeah, it seems the state is as intolerant of uncivil society as it is of civil society, because they don't want anyone showing any sort of independent initiative. So I have all sorts of questions I could ask about memes, but I'm afraid you and I are the only ones who would care. So I'm going to ask a different question. And I think this is particularly when you're reading from your legal cases, and that stuff is always fun. I'm struck by how, as I think you've indicated, how differently these things are described in legal case from the way I would imagine the voices of people talking about it. And so that makes me think of the possible competition or cooperation among these media memes you're talking about, right? Gay propaganda, and I'm using my more traditional notion of meme as like the actual like unit, phrase. And then the vernacular, right? Like all the terrible things that people would say as a matter of course, especially men. And I'm wondering, this is just off the top of my head, and I don't know if you'd have any way of even responding to this based on material, but I'm wondering if in some way these media memes about these media homophobic memes can help activate what is inherent in some of the words that are being used, but whose literal meaning starts being lost. Like, I mean, the most obvious one, I don't know how to do this without saying, like, pideras is both literally a term of abuse against gay men, but also just sort of a general horrible person, right? So, and that these memes can help sort of recharge the actual initial specific homophobic animus in the stuff that's not even latent because it's just so obvious, but there's a whole realm of speech acts and discourse that isn't the media, and I'm just wondering if there's any way of even tracking how that works.
Yeah, thanks for that, and it's definitely fascinating. It fascinates me a lot, and that's exactly what I'm kind of trying to think about, and in those principles that I want to communicate, that actually resonances of those memes are so many, and that's both the complexity and the challenge of it, because for example, this propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships resonated with some people in the form of violence, resonated with other people in the form of discrimination, resonated with some other people in the form of I'm not safe here, I got to go. But it also resonated with some people in terms of, you know, poor things. Let's think about those gays. What's happening? Why the state is targeting them? That the manifestation of kind of that more positive, let's say, emotional background towards the LGBT community was also circulating around in 2013. That was one of the forms this information, this law resonated with people, and I'm just wondering what are all those other forms it resonates with other people. So my point here on more theoretical level is to say that, yeah, we are dealing with a very fragmented, decentralized, fluid, messy situation, and to capture that fluidity, that fragmentation, that decentralization is impossible, but we can at least try to think in that direction and probably create some tools. And I think most importantly, it's not only about, you know, Russia, gay sexuality and stuff like that. I offer one of the examples from last year. I think sometimes to my students when I try to go towards these discussions, it's I think in Dallas or somewhere in Texas, people were expecting JFK to show up, and
JFK
Jr., right? Okay, so and it was not just 3 persons, like just a few people. There were, as far as I understand, thousands of people were convinced so that a person who died didn't and will somehow come and do something that they wanted him to do. So it means that there's some kind of informational flow in some kind of fragment of, in this case, American society, that communicates ideas and creates truths in that Foucauldian sense, but only to a fragment. And other fragments of society or another fragment of society looks at that fragment of society and cannot believe that this can be the case. People can believe in something like that. But people from there also look at those, whatever they call us or you, liberals, lefties, and so what are they talking about? How is that even possible? They don't believe in this, we don't believe in that, and that situation is becoming increasingly more fragmented. So truth is not created by Panopticon-like structure anymore, but it's created in different fragments of society. And that's exactly those resonances that you are also talking about right now, right? Yeah, and the resonances of those memes are different in those different fragments, and they can be as different as murder and violence, and kind of creating positive emotional attachments with the LGBT community. If that's the yeah, it makes sense. No?
There are comments in the chat that I should.
All right, yeah.
This comment may contain strong language. I mentioned in the early 2000s era, and if I heard right, the reasons other than staying in international institutions, the Russian government approach to homosexuality, also the term applying to rape or homosexual rape, if that could be expanded on or covered again, that might be good. So basically, I think what like a little bit more on, why the Russian government didn't want to outlaw homosexual activity, if it was beyond just the international institutions, and how it is that Woodrow ends up staying for homosexual rape, even though technically don't really need it.
Yeah. So the second question first. There's an article in Criminal Code of Russia currently that uses the word muzhelostvo, and they also added lesbianstvo to that article. And that article describes same-sex rape, right? So it prohibits, it punishes same-sex rape. There's an article on rape in general, but that's, I guess, implicitly understood as only heterosexual. So they created another article that prohibits muzhelostvo with the application of force that prohibits. So that's how muzhelostvo from buggery or whatever, from a more general category, was made a much narrower legal concept, just addressing the forced intercourse, right?
Is the punishment different from the
No, the punishment is exactly the same. So it's just a symbolic distinction. There is no other thing. And actually, the easier way would be to expand the, or not to expand, but just from the usage of the category of rape, introduce the idea that sexual intercourse, regardless of being same-sex or opposite sex, with the application of force is not is punishable, is not something that society accepts.
That puts them on the path to parent one and parent two.
Right. That's what they thought. That's exactly how it works. That's why they wanted and needed, the authors of the criminal code, they wanted that distinction. They wanted that distinction of rape, and then they wanted the distinction between different kinds of muzhelostvo. That's how it works, because it's unintelligible to even imagine that it can be just different facets of all in the same thing, of sexuality, of human sexuality. No. Human sexuality is only heterosexual stuff, and LGBT stuff is something different and deviant. So that's that. And yeah, the picture is more complex than just we want to stay in international institutions, and that's why we don't accept criminalization of same-sex activities or gay propaganda in the beginning of 2000s. But that was one of the reasons, to be sure, especially European institutions. The European Council, for example, has certain legal standards. They're not exactly legal, but they're standards that are spread to all the member states, and they are all evolve around equality and same-sex relationships. LGBT issues are part of the standards, and they are very explicit there. For example, decriminalization of homosexuality is partly, again, connected to being member state of the European Council. And Ireland, where I live now, decriminalized male homosexuality in 1993 as well, in the same year, and with more or less the same reason as the European Council wanted them to do so. They were quite reluctant, even though they had a history of argument against criminalization of same-sex there for quite a while already, by 1993, but still they didn't do it. So part of the explanation is that, and Russia wanted to be there, and until 2014, Russia was gradually integrating into different worldwide and regional institutions that, well, just have certain standards in their fields, economy, human rights, democracy, and so on and so forth. In 2014, things changed, definitely, and that wasn't important anymore. And even a little bit earlier with the loss of legitimacy of the government in 2011, 2012, when people went to the street and said, well, these elections are not working. This is something, there's something wrong here. So there's that. But also, if you read comments of the legal department of Duma, of the parliament, Russian parliament, on the attempts to criminalize gay propaganda in the beginning of 2000s and other legal initiatives of this sort, if you read the comments of the legal department, they actually make a clear legal case. In the Constitution, we have equality. The activity, same-sex activities, are not criminalized. Therefore, given these two things, you cannot criminalize propaganda of the activity that is not criminal. You know, and given that that we are basing our law on equality, this legal argument was repeated once and again with every attempt of the parliamentarians to introduce the gay propaganda thing. And eventually, even in 2013, it was repeated again. But then the parliamentarians didn't care anymore about the legal department. And they just, whatever, we're still gonna have the law.
Another question from the chat from Mark Steinberg. I'm wondering about language categories in relation to emotions and violence. In testimony in court cases, for example, but also in public life, what can we know from the terminology for LGBT people? What is implied in relation to your list of emotions from different terms, especially slang, and assuming people are using terms of the non-traditional. So sort of related to my question, but going in a little different direction.
So the question is, how slang is used?
Let's see. I think the question has to do with the emotions. Mark, did you want to say anything? You can unmute yourself.
Let's see. I'll try. Am I here?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it is similar to Elliot's question, but a little slight, as he says, in a slightly different angle. So either in court cases when people are talking about LGBTQ people, or more complicated if there's information of sort of on the street in everyday life, the type of terminology people use. They don't just say, I presume, this person is non-traditional. They're using other terms, which are often slang. And it seems to me those terms are likely to be embedded with emotions. And I really liked your sort of chart, your cloud of different possible emotions. And I wonder if you can make a connection between, one might say, the violence of different terminology that's being used and the type of emotions you're exploring. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got you. Thanks for that. And I think on the one hand, indeed, you would say words communicate different emotions, and a lot of the vocabulary to refer to LGBT issues and people in Russia is based on kind of prison terminology, all other sorts of the history of violence, discrimination, and marginalization. That vocabulary is usually questionable, to say the least, and therefore it communicates a lot of negative attitudes, emotions, that kind of dimension. But there are also two things that complicate this idea. First, it shocked me a little bit, but a lot of people, LGBT people in Russia, started to use this non-traditional category to identify themselves, you know, and to say, well, I'm a non-traditional person, so here you are. Instead of saying gay, instead of saying lesbian. I mean, I don't have statistical observation about that, but it has become quite common in around 2013, and then I left anyway. So there is that, and that's I think an observation that can be taken further and looked at. And another idea is that in the law, in those criminal rulings that I looked at, sometimes judges used very nice categories, like don't remember exactly what the adjective was, probably non-traditional, but non-traditional love, for example. Love is a nice word, and it creates all the good vibes around itself, but they didn't use it in good way and to communicate anything good about, well, non-traditional love. They definitely had all the bad words in their mind. They just didn't know how to say otherwise. That's the context. That's the let's say the condition of language, of talking about sexuality in Russia. There are a lot of omissions. There are a lot of gaps. There are a lot of I don't know. There's a lot of uncomfortableness that creates monsters, that creates categories detached from their immediate connotation. You know, that you can say love to mean something bad. You can say non-traditional person to mean something good, and that or even prison vocabulary that is being reclaimed, for example, currently, or at least a few years ago, there were very nice attempts to use Peter to refer to gay people, but by gay people, gay men. And that also was, on the one hand, a controversy, but on the other hand, a way to create out of that vocabulary something, some kind of different emotional context. So I would say that there is, yeah, some kind of not just complexity, but poverty of sexualized language or LGBT language vocabulary in Russian language. And that creates many different strange things that are not immediately easily identifiable in this emotional dimension. I would say something like that. And that's super interesting.
There's one more question in chat. As for how Russia's homophobic propaganda ban acts to situate themselves in the 21st century, do you see Russia reapproaching Western modernity and embracing LGBT rights as a geopolitical strategy in the future? Or for what reason would you see Russia ever changing their orientation towards LGBTQ plus issues?
Well, I mean, I think the conditions are created for just one reason, to change this direction and change it radically. The regime based on Putin's personality and authority and actions eventually is going to fall, and sooner rather than later, given all the context and all the actions that the government is currently doing. And when it falls, I think the next government will have to act completely kind of counter to what the current government has been doing. I think it will be very hard to maintain legitimacy of this new government on the same platform. So if the issue of LGBT rights is so central, so important for current government, the next one will have to do exactly the opposite. Probably, you know, adopt same-sex marriage law and enter into same-sex marriage. I don't know, everything that works. The issue is political and politicized, and it's internationally politicized, not only in Russia. And I think that's how it's going to be. Now, is it a kind of wishful thinking in a way? This is also possible. It's Russia. You never know what's going to happen, right?
Great. Well, thank you once again for this fantastic talk.
Yes.